What I want to do in this video is go over a labor market model using supply and demand. A more traditional classical model of using supply and demand to make analysis of the labor market. So go back to this circular flow diagram that we went over and the very simple model of the economy. And up in top where it says the market for outputs, that's where all the supply and demand curves once again for all the products and services that businesses produce. Down here on the bottom where it says the market for inputs, this is again where supply and demand curves are for the products and services that businesses buy from households, like labor. Households supply labor to businesses, and businesses supply the money to the households for their labor. So let's take a look at this labor market using supply and demand. And it's the same thing, same process as other markets. It's just now that the supply curve is from people, the households, that are supplying their services, their time and effort. And it's the businesses that are the demanders. So same thing here, we have a supply and demand. It's just that the roles are a little bit reversed here, where businesses are the demanders of labor. And there's a price of labor, which we'll put on the vertical axis, which is the wage rate. So here is wage. We usually just use W as a symbol for wage and also for wealth. And there's an equilibrium in this market. Down here on the x-axis is the quantity of labor. And at equilibrium, we'll call that W star and Q star. At equilibrium here, there really is no unemployment. Everyone that wants a job has a job. There's no surplus or shortage in the market. And the wage rate for everybody is the same. Now in this model of using supply and demand here, for the model of perfect competition, prices adjust so that we get to equilibrium quickly. And that means no unemployment. But we see unemployment around in the world. So what's going on here? Well, we take a look at this model and say, well, what are the assumptions of this model? The assumptions of the perfect competition model is that there's identical goods. Which means that labor is identical. That means everybody's the same. Identical workers. Labor is identical. We know that's not true. Everybody's different. Another assumption is that there's many buyers and sellers. Many buyers and sellers. That means many people that want to work and many employers. There's perfect information. And there's flexible prices or flexible wages. Now in this model, if there's unemployment, it means that there's people who want to work that can't find a job, which means there's a surplus of workers. Well, the only way we can have a surplus of workers is if the wage is higher than W star. So let's say the wage was up here I'll put this in red. We'll call it W superscript H for high. Well, we could go over here to see how many people would be wanted by employers. We could go over here to the supply curve to see how many people want a job. The quantity supplied is greater than the quantity demanded. Quantity supplied is greater than quantity demanded. That means surplus in the labor market or unemployment. So this horizontal distance right here would be unemployment. So in this model, the solution is that the wages are too high and they need to fall. And as wages fall, we'll be moving along the supply curve and the demand curve, and we'll move down to equilibrium quickly. And at equilibrium, there will no longer be unemployment. But that's not really what we see. We frequently see unemployment, and it lasts a long time. Now, the economists of 100 years ago said, well, the unemployment shouldn't last very long. Just do nothing, and the unemployment will go away on its own. The government doesn't have to interfere with the market. Wages are just too high and they need to fall. Keynes said something's wrong with this model. Didn't quite know what, but something isn't right about this model. And he was right about that. Something's wrong with this model, using this model of perfect competition to analyze the labor market. The biggest problem here is that people are not all identical. Keynes thought this was the problem, and it might be, that the wage rate is not flexible. Wages are sticky, and he came up with this term of sticky wages. He said during bad times, employers don't want to give their employees a pay cut, and employees don't want to take a pay cut. And so there's no pressure on wages to fall. And in bad times, if you ask employers, well, hey, why don't you just lower wages of everybody if there's a recession and times are bad? And generally the answer that you get is we don't want to cut wages because our best employees will leave. So they actually prefer to lay people off than to lower everyone's wages. And the recession of about 10 years ago in 2007, 2008, a lot of people were laid off. Unemployment rate went up to about 10%. Huge numbers of people being laid off. And I watched very carefully to see what are employers going to do. Are they going to try to cut people's wages, the workers' wages, or are they going to lay people off? And what I saw was in response to a lack of demand for their products, they laid people off. They did not reduce employees' wages whatsoever. So Keynes might have been right about this, that maybe wages are sticky downward. They're not flexible. And so this model really isn't appropriate to analyze the labor market because it doesn't really explain why there's unemployment that persists for quite some time. Maybe we just can't get to equilibrium very quickly. So Keynes came up with this idea of maybe sticky wages in the wage market or labor market, but he didn't really know what the problem. He just knew it was probably a bad market. And to show you how this would work, suppose there is a demand shift to the left in the labor market. Maybe employers can't sell their goods. There's a recession going on. Their demand for labor decreases. So we can show that as a shift to the left of the demand for labor by employers. They just don't need as many people there to work in their offices. Now, a new equilibrium will be less people and a lower wage. And if we could get to that new equilibrium, according to this model, then we wouldn't have any unemployment. But if that wage is not flexible, that means that at the old wage, W star, this is the quantity that would be demanded by employers. And over here would be the quantity supplied by workers. And that means that if this wage can't fall, then we would have this unemployment here of this distance right here. So if the wage is not flexible, we'll have this unemployment, and it could persist for quite a while until the wage fell. Now, if there's unemployment in the economy, that means there's idleness. People aren't working. So the PPF, if we were to draw the PPF for the economy, if everyone is working, there's no unemployment, we should be right here on the edge of the PPF. But if there's unemployment in the economy, then that means we're inside of the PPF. So this has some unemployment, which means that our output, it's certainly possible, but it's not an efficient place to be. Full employment is right here on the edge of the PPF.